Welcome back, everyone. We're blessed to see the sunshine. And thank you for the pictures of the rainbows. So we'll begin this afternoon's study with a word of prayer. Please bow. Our loving God in heaven, we thank you for this taste of heaven here on earth. For rain, spiritual and literal. And as we gather together now, we ask for more blessings, that you would prepare your people for what is ahead. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So as we were informed at the beginning of this camp, there's been some meetings of the Sunday law teachers. There were two questions that have been asked of all of us, and that is, why has there been a change from Sunday law as a law to an election? And the second part of that question is, why this election cycle? So when we knocked heads together, we came up with 5 proofs as to why Sunday law now is election. So I'm just going to write them here. I'll write election cycle. So number 1, rise and fall of nations. Number 2, January 6. 3 is the flood. Which is Fabius Maximus Gurgis. 4 is about Caesar, the study we learnt this morning. And this final one that we will run through now is Daniel chapter 6. Can anybody see what all these 5 proofs have in common? One word, shout it out. Daniel. Rise and fall of nations, where do we get that from? Daniel 2, 7, 8, 9, 11. I'll write Daniel 2. January 6. Panium. Whoops. Nope. One next. Ah, I love those buttons. January 6, Panium. Chapter verse. I'm going to say 13, but you can correct me. I'll pretend I know. The flood. Sit at the back of the class if you get this one wrong. I'll answer it for you. Caesar. Verse 16. And Daniel 6 speaks for itself. So all these proofs are connected with the book of Daniel. It's the book that John the Revelator has to eat. And so we know that when we look at the prophecies of Daniel, that we can line up Daniel 2, 7, 8 and 11. And we know when we say 8, we also mean 9. And when we say 11, we include 10 and 12. That these chapters are built on the principle of repeat and enlarge. Same story, different themes. But sometimes a story can repeat. It's not necessarily an enlargement. It can stand on its own. We have to be careful when we look at repeats that we're not looking for subjects as second witnesses. That a subject can be its own witness. That it can stand on its own feet with its own validity. And that's our belief about Daniel chapter 6. So my exploration of the Sunday law began with Fabius Maximus Gurgis. Seeing the relationship between the bean and elections. The Faber bean and elections. And there was a time when I thought Daniel chapter 6 was a second witness of Fabius Maximus Gurgis. But the more that we looked at it, the more we saw that Daniel 6 can stand on its own feet. And so it is a witness all of itself. So let's consider the stories of Daniel. The stories of Daniel illustrate the everlasting gospel. Daniel chapter 1 illustrates the first angel's message. Daniel has to fear God more than he fears the king. He is called to glorify God in his body. Because judgment is coming. He will be judged in 10 days and 3 years. So please notice that in Daniel chapter 1 there are 2 tests. There was a lot of discussion yesterday about tests. And I think we discussed that it's hard to choose which one of those tests is the greater one. Because both really mattered. So Daniel chapter 2 is the story of the second angel's message. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. We see the head of gold that fell, literal Babylon that falls. And right down at the end of the world, spiritual Babylon falls. Daniel and his friends would not have understood that image of Daniel 2 had they not passed the test of Daniel chapter 1. And then Daniel chapter 3 illustrates the third angel's message. See, an unrighteous decree, a test, and a fiery furnace. A time of trouble such as never was. There never was a time when a furnace was heated 10 times more than it was wont to be heated. And the spirit of prophecy clearly explains how this represents a Sunday law test. When we look at the second set of stories, we see that the everlasting gospel is repeated. But this isn't a story about Daniel and his friends. Oh, sorry, thank you. Thank you. This is a story of kings. Daniel chapter 4 is a story about Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 5, Belshazzar. Daniel 6, Darius. So we have Babylon, and the Medes and Persians. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has to fear God and stop glorifying himself. As there is a warning of judgment. In Daniel chapter 5, we see the literal fall of Babylon. And in Daniel chapter 6, we see an unrighteous decree. So Daniel chapter 6 is also illustrates a Sunday law. But they are telling a different story. Because in Daniel chapter 4, it's not a story of Daniel. Daniel is Belteshazzar. In Daniel chapter 5, again, we see Belteshazzar. The name Belteshazzar is not mentioned in Daniel 6, but it is the role of Daniel as a public servant, a civil servant. So what Daniel represents in these three stories are institutions. And we can see Daniel represent individuals, the movement, and also institutions when we look at these 6 different stories. While we can take an individual application in chapters 1, 2 and 3, he more appropriately represents the movement, God's people, in 1, 2 and 3. But 4, 5 and 6 is a different theme. So if we consider Daniel chapter 6, we know that it is a story of Darius. And yet, how long did Darius reign? Because if you go to Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 9 is also the first year of Darius. And Darius only ruled for 1 year. So we know that there is a connection between Daniel chapter 6 and Daniel chapter 9. Daniel in this story represents public servants. I had many arguments with Adventists when a Seventh-day Adventist was running for the... when Ben Carson was running for... he wasn't running for president, he was running for... running for... when he was a candidate for the presumptive... sorry. The arguments that were being made was that at Seventh-day Adventists can be politicians. Because look at Ben Carson and Daniel. So Ben Carson would be a type of Daniel. But what we need to recognise here is Daniel is not a politician. Daniel is a public servant. They operate differently. When Nebuchadnezzar was eating grass for 7 years, the country was actually able to run without him. Because there are institutions in place to keep the country running efficiently. And that's the role of the public or civil servant. So Daniel in these stories is not about him being a politician. When the Medes and Persians took conquered Babylon, they are setting up a new form of government. And that is laid out in verses 1 to 3. where you have 120 princes, 3 presidents, one of which is Daniel. And some of these presidents have a different idea of how power is going to operate, and they are going to influence the king. And as you know, the king is going to make a law. And what we want to note here is that this law is a valid law. In a new government, it's only reasonable that you need to consolidate power. It's early days in the setting up of this kingdom, and it would seem reasonable that the executive power be able to be in control. This law is the law is legal because it is according to the Medes and Persians. So, according to their constitution, they're not doing anything wrong. And yet it is going to tread down on people's human rights. And so we can look at this story as a moral story and how we give our first devotion to God. But prophetically, it's about how these institutions relate to the executive power. So Daniel and these institutions have to bring all their petitions to the king only. In the story, it's called prayers. They are only to pray to the king. And we know that in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is going to have a prayer. If Daniel does not pray in Daniel chapter 9, the prayer of Leviticus 26, he cannot get the increase of knowledge. So we can note that in Daniel chapter 6, Daniel is an institution. But in Daniel chapter 9, he is Daniel the prophet. So we can draw 2 stories out of this scenario when we combine the 2 chapters. But we want to limit ourselves to Daniel chapter 6. And the symbolism of prayer. So there is a word for prayer that is suffrage. Suffrage has its roots in a French word that means intercession or prayers on behalf of another. And suffrages or the right to vote so I'll just say suffragists are people that are they're activists striving for the right to vote. So you would be familiar with the suffragists of the 18th and early 1900s. That were fighting for the right for the women to vote. So we can use symbolism here to connect prayer with voting. It's interesting that when we consider the faba bean, the faba bean in the northern hemisphere always gets planted on All Souls Day. All Souls Day. So if I say All Saints Day, you know All Saints Day? What happened on All Saints Day? That's when you pray for everybody. You pray for all the saints in heaven. Everybody was in church on All Saints Day when the Lisbon earthquake struck. And they weren't able to plant their faba beans on All Souls Day, which is the next day. And that is when you pray for the dead. And it is the traditional day to plant your faba beans. And there were many people in the past that refused to eat faba beans because they believed they were shaped like a human soul. And they represented the souls of the dead. So we can see here in Daniel 6, where if we use this symbolism of prayer being voting, that we can see it's an election issue. The Catholic Dictionary defines suffrages as prayers offered for the repose of the souls of the faithfully departed. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. was protesting to bring in the Voting Rights Act in the United States. And he said there must be change, there will be a change, for to deny a person the right to exercise his political freedom at the polls is no less a dastardly act as to deny a Christian the right to petition God in prayer. And so we can connect voting with Daniel chapter 6. And Daniel chapter 6 can stand as its own witness to Sunday law being connected with an election. And that's all I have to share on Daniel chapter 6. And we're now going to have a question and answer session.